All right, week 7, and we are continuing on chapter 3, which I really like this chapter because it's really focused on the nutrition aspect of doing endurance performance. But it also talks about limits to performance and fatigue. And this is a really interesting chapter. I usually like to show a video of people collapsing at the finish line or before they reach the finish line, because they've reached their limit. And what does limit us during endurance performance? What stops us from exercise? What stops us from continuing in a graded exercise test to maximal effort? What causes that collapse at the end of a marathon or end of an Ironman? It's a scary thing when it does happen, and it is really interesting to stop and really think about the physiology that is going on at that time. And so this chapter has that information. I go into fatigue a bit, which is a really interesting phenomenon where I talk about the physiology of fatigue and then even recognize some of the psychological aspects of fatigue and where the central governor model might actually come in and play a role with why the person is stopping or slowing down exercise. Fatigue is a really interesting and difficult area to study. So it's sort of fun, but we all want to understand how to minimize fatigue through training and experience, and how do we maximize our performance. All right, so in this week, we're continuing chapter 3. We've got 3 more videos from chapter 3 broken out into smaller sections. And then I put together a video. It's longer than it should have been, but I put together a video on fuel options. Remember, this is not test material, so there's no way that I'm going to ask a question about, hey, how many calories are in a typical gel or a sachet of fuel. Instead, you want to watch this with the eye of applying the material that you're covering in chapter 3 to understand endurance performance. What athletes are doing, how they are getting carbohydrate in, and how athletes may be getting fat in, and how they may be trying to tap into the fat that we have stored in the body to do endurance performance. Remember, carbohydrate, there's this interplay between blood glucose, liver glucose, and muscle glucose. And we're also trying to take fuel in during these long events in order to sustain exercise. And so now we have that other added component of digestion. So once we take in a fuel, it has to go through the stomach into the GI area, the gastrointestinal area, into the small intestines, large intestines for absorption to occur. And so there's a time that actually happens, and we talk about gastric emptying, and we're going to continue to talk about that even as we move into chapter 4. Really interesting area. All right, so I just talked about some fuel options, and you'll see some of the fuels that I use, my wife uses, and again, it's longer than it probably needs to be. No test questions off of that, but gives you some context so that if I ask a test question with the term gel or powdered drink that's in a water bottle, you'll understand the context of those types of questions. Then I included a link to a video podcast that Ted Gerard and I did with someone from Optimized Fat Metabolism, where they are really interested in using fat as a fuel. And now they do sell a product, so we got to keep that in mind. But this is an interesting area that athletes are constantly looking at in terms of using fat, because we have plenty of fat on our body, plenty of fat, unless you really get down into the low single digits of % body composition. Now, we do have essential amount of body fat that we need, that really we should not tap into for fuel. But most of us have plenty of fat on us to use and support exercise. It's just a matter of how do you tap into that fuel to help you complete an endurance event. So interesting talk, and but remember, he does have a product, and you always have to keep that in mind as we're listening to those types of presentations.